Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Joel Cessna, and with me is Letitia Fecher, and we are excited to be here today to talk about nurse recruitment trends and what we're seeing in the space. So we do have a lot of things we want to cover today, so we'll kind of jump right in. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are the overall healthcare landscape and recruiting trends, again, that we've been seeing in the space. In addition to recruitment, we need to really think about retention. So Letitia is going to be talking about creating that retention engagement culture within your organization. And then we'll start diving into some of the common tactics to recruit new employees, as well as what to consider when doing recruitment campaigns from a messaging standpoint. If you have any questions, please go ahead and post them in the chat function. We want to make sure that we have roughly 15 minutes or so at the end to address any questions at that time. So Letitia, if you want to tell us about you.
Thanks, Joel. Hi there. I'm honored to be here with you today. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Letitia Fecher. I'm a vice president at Jarrard, and I'm also a practice leader for the public and community health systems focused practice. I'm laser focused on health systems just like yours every day, and frankly, it is my passion. Before working at Jarrard, I actually sat in a lot of your shoes, a lot of your seats and walked in your shoes. I worked in both for-profit and non-for-profit health systems all across the country. So in marketing, communications, and strategy. And just to give you a little bit of background, Jarrard is a strategic communications consulting firm. And all we do is work with leaders just like you of healthcare providers and organizations all across the country. Our clients span from national systems to AMCs to regional community hospitals, publicly owned hospitals, behavioral health, long-term care, and we're working with them during times of high stakes moments in time, major change, challenge, and opportunity. Joel?
Perfect, thank you. So I'm Joel Cessna, as I mentioned. I'm the VP of Sales with Eruptr. I've been working with hospitals and marketing departments going on 13 years now, really focused on digital tactics, focused on patient acquisition. So got my start working with Medicom Health, the online health risk assessment space, and a little over 8 years ago came to Eruptr. Eruptr focuses on digital marketing channels such as SEM, Facebook, etc., really for patient acquisition and awareness. So really excited to be here today. As a side note, I actually used to be a NESHCO board member about 4 or 5 years ago. Really been a big fan of the NESHCO organization, attending the spring conference and such over the past 10, 11 years. So really excited to be here today with you all. All right, let's start into the fun. So Letitia, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. So first, we're going to go through a little bit of research and data that we've conducted over the past year or so in a couple different national consumer surveys that we'd like to just share with you a couple of those highlights that I think will be beneficial for this conversation. And we want to go through our slides, of course, and share with you a lot of great information, but we also want to make sure we have plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions and open conversation. So last fall, we surveyed 1,000 nurses across the country. These findings on this slide show what you know and have been experiencing already. Nurse satisfaction is not nearly as strong as we need it to be, and there are still too many good healthcare workers who are considering getting out. But 3/4 of those surveyed wanted to stay in the field. The need to engage and support our nurses just remains a top priority for us and for you, for their sake and the sake of our healthcare system and our patients. So you'll see here on the left, about 66 are currently satisfied, between very satisfied and somewhat satisfied with their job. And about, like I said, 3/4 are still likely to want to stay in the field. So moving on to the next slide, When we asked who is your most trusted source of information, the result was not honestly surprising to us, and maybe not as surprising to you as well. We find this is true with all healthcare professionals, that the person they look to for information and who they trust the most is their direct manager. This is undoubtedly true for nurses as well. What we also find is that nurse managers become managers and leaders by being great nurses and being promoted from within over time. They're not necessarily trained in leadership or communications or engagement. So on the next slide, you'll see that we asked, how effective do you think your organization is at cascading information? So that cascade that goes through your organization, from administration to management to teams, that eventually leads to all of your staff. And we heard that we're not doing a great job here, not super effective. Fewer than half of our nurses think that their organization is effectively cascading information. So, more than half don't think that we're doing a great job. This offers additional insight into the idea that managers really need those communications training. They need the support, they need tools and resources. If any organization isn't effectively cascading, those who are part of the process really just need help in order to do it more effectively. And so on the next slide, we saw when we work with health systems, honestly, I always hear that face-to-face communication is the most important. And this is even more true with nurses who are not sitting at their computers. You know this already. And nurses don't seek out information like many of us do when they go to their emails, or when we go to our emails, or we go to the internet. We're seeking out information. Nurses generally don't seek out information. They rather wait to hear it from their manager or from others. So you'll see on this scale that it's really heavily weighed on those face-to-face communications, first with their managers, then with conversations with other, perhaps senior leadership or other vice presidents, the town hall meetings where they can attend and hear things live. It's important to note that one of the problems with videos is that many nurses just don't have access to computers with speakers on the units. And you probably already know this, but it's worth noting that even most recently, when I did a survey with all employees, just recently with a health system in Pennsylvania, video is just, they don't want to see videos anymore, even those who do have access to computers. And on the next slide, we also looked at what might be able to help bolster the nursing workforce in the absence of significant changes in compensation. So finances are tight for everyone right now. It's been a tough year. It was a tough, start to the year. Finances are tough. So we're not in an environment where money is no object, and career development and adding staff and giving nurses room to take a break really came out on top, while non-financial compensation and career development were on the list as well. Interestingly enough, though, we don't show it here, but younger nurses were actually more likely to pick things like mental health support and more engagement with leaders than older nurses. So it's worth noting that, just as Joel will talk about when it comes to recruitment tactics, that engagement and retention tactics just aren't a one size fits all. But even if your organization isn't able to fulfill all of the nurses' preferences, there are also things that you can just avoid doing. Things that seem well-intentioned, but actually may do more harm than good. We heard loud and clear that gestures of appreciation like pizza parties and trinkets were actually viewed negatively by nurses who felt their overall work environment and just the organizational culture has begun to lack, and those who felt underpaid. So we just need to be really careful with these kinds of incentives and these kinds of things, that it doesn't seem like we're tone deaf to what their real wants and needs are. And then one more slide on the survey data before we get into engagement tactics. So shifting gears here, I just wanted to share with you this one last slide. We can see a powerful opportunity to help strengthen our culture and provide more of a sense of satisfaction among nurses. A few weeks ago, we actually published our latest national consumer survey that was consumer survey, not nurses. But this looked at how the US public views the healthcare system and healthcare provider organizations and what people prioritize when it comes to their own care. We asked what factors matter most when pursuing different types of healthcare. And the two overwhelming priorities were getting the right care for my needs and having that care covered by insurance. But digging deeper into that, you can see that matters of trust and relationship round out the top considerations. People want to be listened to and cared for and prioritized above the organization. Those are relational and communication matters. And that's where our nurses are perfectly placed, right? They're the ones spending time with patients, taking notes, relaying information. And we know nurses got into healthcare because of that mission-oriented, because they're mission-oriented people. So patients want to feel cared for, nurses want to provide that care. So equipping and supporting nurses in that work through communications training, tools, technology, reducing the administrative burden where we can. And this goes with our physicians and our other providers too. We can help our caregivers reconnect with the reason that they're here to begin with, and that will reap benefits for them and our patients. So how do we engage with nurses? So moving on to nurse engagement, our goal, just to level set here, is to leverage existing communication channels and implement new tactics to enhance our engagement efforts, empowering our nurse leaders and our team, fostering that connection, collaboration, and trust. And I see this in 3 different buckets. So on the next slide, I have it segmented into 3, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail. But first is elevating that executive leader presence and building trust across nursing leaders, across nursing teams through meaningful and consistent and intentional points of connection. The second one is empowering our next level leaders. Those are our managers, our nurse managers, by equipping them with the nurses or equipping them with the tools and the resources needed to grow as communicators. And then the third is engaging our nurse teams by promoting that culture of respect and collaboration through communication structure and process. So on the next slide, we're going to dig into a little bit on that elevating your executive leader presence. We saw earlier that the one-on-one communication, that face-to-face communication is really important. And so what we don't want to do is create a bunch of new tools for you, or we don't want to create a bunch of new tools that nurses will have to then learn or get acclimated with. So leveraging your existing strong communications foundation to deploy executive engagement tactics to build that comprehensive nursing communications infrastructure is really what I'm thinking about here. So leveraging your nurse leaders and your other leaders through thought leadership to enhance their voice is really important. And then to define what is important to them and leveraging those things, because authenticity is key here when we're thinking about thought leadership with our executives. Also to set expectations on intentional rounding. And this isn't just rounding to just talk to nurses or to say hi or to shake hands. This is intentional rounding. So getting a brief from nurse managers or leaders ahead of time on the specific things that are happening in the unit. Maybe a nurse got a special recognition. Maybe there's a particular issue that they've been all thinking about. Maybe you just had a recent announcement and there's something particular that's on their mind about that. Talking to those nurse leaders or those leaders ahead of time before executives round, so they have a little bit of insight, so they can do some real listening, is just one extra step that will go a long way. Also doing town halls with nurses. I know this is difficult getting them off of floors, but perhaps doing even smaller group town halls where you're offering the opportunity for them to have that one-on-one engagement with your executive leaders. And also just celebrating nursing excellence, small wins. through defined communication outlets to reward and recognize nurses using your current infrastructure, or maybe building out your infrastructure on your intranet or in your newsletter or in your weekly communication that comes out from your CEO. Celebrating some of those small wins in those communications, as well as through this intentional rounding, can go a long way. And also following up on the feedback. When executive leaders round and they hear something, to make sure the next time they round, they have an answer or they have an anecdote or some kind of conclusion to something that they heard about the first time. And on the next slide, we'll go into that second, which I feel like is really critical. I think it's probably the most important thing that you can do if you're going to engage with your nurses, and that's to empower your nurse leaders, your managers, those who have been promoted up the ranks to be these great nurse leaders, but don't necessarily have the training to be communicators. Rightly so, they went to school to be a nurse, not necessarily to be managing people or to be communicating. So I've done a lot of this kind of training with nurse leaders, with managers, supervisors, either clinical or non-clinical, to really provide a lot of communication and engagement, practical communication training and feedback, really giving them the opportunity and the tools and the resources to learn how to be great communicators, how to deal with tough questions, how to answer questions when you don't necessarily have all the answers, but to do so in a way that you're listening and are able to respond, instead of just pivoting to say, it's not me making those decisions, it's them, or just not being comfortable in those kinds of situations. Also, to establish a communications cascade by setting expectations on when and how to communicate. So for example, if you have an announcement or a change coming, to actually inform or meet with those nurse leaders, to walk them through the messaging, to walk them through anticipated questions, and then set the expectation that they have those engagements with their nurses and their teams. Developing resources and those materials so they are able to communicate, like I just mentioned, like the talking point or an FAQ, providing those with them and sharing with them so they feel like they have the information and it's not just given to them. And then create the formal opportunities to share questions and ask questions and open dialogue, a place where they can go and submit questions or share thoughts and feedback, and where they're going to get answers. And lastly, engagement with your nursing teams. So when it comes down to the nurses who are on the floors doing the work, really prioritize opportunities to engage in those face-to-face conversations. I know we're short-staffed right now. Everyone's short-staffed. Everyone's running a mile a minute. But in order to increase patient satisfaction, we need to make sure that our workforce is satisfied as well. And we heard earlier that face-to-face communications goes a long way. And I really, would ask you to consider making this a priority with your nurse teams, with your executive teams, and others. Leverage listening sessions, making sure that their voices are heard, and that we understand what they're going through, and have that opportunity for that two-way conversation. Utilizing your resources that you already have, newsletters, intranet, other things, to make sure that you're celebrating some of those small wins that I had mentioned earlier, that you're featuring nurses and that you're, really recognizing that group. And offer opportunities for professional growth. We need these leaders, or we need these nurses to stay with us for a long time. Well, what is it that they want from the organization other than to do their job every day? They want a voice. They want to feel like they have a stake with the organization and where it's going with their unit or department. So providing them those opportunities. And then also I work with, actually, one of my colleagues is a former nurse, and this is something that she's really passionate about. To develop this thoughtful approach to onboarding, using our preceptors, using the time to onboard nurses into new units or departments or new facilities in a way where they really feel comfortable and not just being like thrown to the wolves to start doing their job when they don't really understand the dynamics, the culture that is happening within a particular unit or department. Really taking the time to make sure that happens, that is a retention strategy that is often overlooked, quite honestly, but can go a long way, and also invests and make sure that they're happy individuals and that they feel like they're part of a team that makes sense to them. Joel.
Perfect. So thanks, Letitia. So we're going to dive into, so what do you do with all this? Recruiting new nurses, or even just other staff positions in general. So Letitia just went through a lot of great information on retention and really what nurses are saying. And I can even support a lot of that data, as my wife is an ER nurse, and a lot of these concerns, like just wanting to be heard and the trust factor and leadership, are really two of the biggest concerns that they've said, or that my wife has said. You know, it's not all about the money, right? So taking that and now moving it into recruitment, we want to make sure that that messaging is aligned, right? So making sure that it's very similar to what you're doing internally versus externally. That's really starting to set the stage right from day one. You also want to start thinking about what separates you from your competition down the street. Why does someone want to, or why should someone want to come work with you rather than someone else? And we're going to touch on the competition factor here in a little bit. Making it very easy for them to relate. And this is through video content, different advertisements, things like that, but making it very easy for them to picture themselves working for your organization. And then last, and actually probably most important, really to determine and articulate what your value proposition is. Again, what makes you special, because every organization does have that special component, and it's really making sure that that comes out in your advertisement, your recruitment strategies. So other campaign considerations to consider in addition to messaging is your landing page experience. So I always like to say, if you're driving people to junk, that's the type of results you're going to get from your campaign. So think about the money, the investment that you're spending, whether it's digital or traditional tactics, to drive them to a landing page. If you were in their shoes, what would you want to see? So the first thing, like if it was me, I would want it to be very clear and concise. What's my next steps? What does that call to action look like? Do they want me to submit a resume? Is it a phone call? Is it a form fill? And then as an organization, you're going to want to be able to make sure that you can track whatever those call to actions are. So again, if it's a phone call, making sure that you can track that phone call to see, were they truly calling in for interest in an open position, or was it someone calling to pay a bill at the hospital, right? So making sure that you can get to that true downstream tracking to determine the ROI of the campaign. And making sure that that application process is easy. I do have two different pages here. Both are current clients of ours running recruitment campaigns, both completely different strategies. So you'll notice the Cape Cod page on the right is very clean and clear when it comes to that call to action. What do they want them to do? And they're making it very easy. What you don't see below the fold is a form fill that they can fill out, and then they can attach that resume to that form submission. But right at the top of the page, they could submit their resume, they could make a phone call, or they could email it right to a recruitment email. The page on the left is a little bit different. Below the fold, what you do not see is a button that they can click on to find open positions. When they click on that, it goes to every single position within the organization. Now, it's really two completely different strategies because the Parkview instance, in addition to running specific nurse recruitment campaigns, They also have a secondary campaign that is for all other positions that are not nurse recruitment related. So think lab techs, housekeeping, maintenance, things like that. And it's really a good idea to keep those two types of campaigns separate because the nurse recruitment budget, due to the demand of nurse recruitment searches, would eat up a large amount of that budget. So if you have a $5,000 a month budget, nurse recruitment would probably eat up 80 to 90% of that budget. So by having two separate campaigns, it allows more dollars to be allocated to those other positions that they're trying to fill as well. And then lastly, just make sure that that page is updated. So if you are posting specific jobs on that page, once they've been filled, go ahead and remove them. Because the worst thing that you want to do is get more and more applicants in for positions that you're not hiring for at that time. And then the last thing to consider when it comes to campaign considerations is your competition. So like I talked about earlier, really know what they're doing in market. So are they advertising? If so, what channels? Not saying that you have to match and mirror everything that they're doing from an advertising perspective, but just having an understanding of what they're doing. And in addition to that, what are they offering? Is it a sign-on bonus? I know that we work with a client that has a $60,000 sign-on bonus. Not many organizations can do that. So what you need to really then focus on is that third point about what is your competitive advantage. So again, as I mentioned earlier, all of you have a separator or a differentiator from your competition. So really identifying what that is and making sure that's coming out in your messaging and your advertising. And start thinking outside the box too when it comes to incentives. It doesn't always have to be a sign-on bonus or an increase in pay. When you think about everything that the nursing or medical community in general really has been through over the last few years, we have some clients that have increased their PTO. So while it still is technically a financial incentive, providing the opportunity for your staff to take a vacation and just get away and decompress is really one incentive that a lot of people have been very well received to. So when it comes to a campaign, what's the best way to drive in qualified applicants? The first tactic, and this is the first one that you should deploy, is SEM, or search engine marketing, also known as pay-per-click, also known as Google Ads. So it kind of, a lot of different words can be used for SEM, but this by far is going to drive in the bulk of your qualified candidates. The reason behind that is they are actively searching for nurse openings near me, or different keywords along those lines. So we're targeting them at that moment of intent that they're searching. So this really needs to be the very first digital tactic that you're utilizing, and that you make sure that you have enough budget going towards it. As you know, pretty much everyone is recruiting nurses at this time. So $1,000 a month budget that could have been working 5-6 years ago, you probably need to almost double that at this time. So just making sure that there's enough budget towards SEM to be effective. And then, as I mentioned, this does typically yield the most qualified candidates, again, because it's all around that intent focus. The second tactic that we notice perform pretty well is Facebook. Typically, it's going to be more of an awareness play, but by different targeting approaches and interest group targeting, things like that, you can really try to hone in what audience sees those ads. You really want to make it personal. So using your existing staff as in the pictures, or video is also a good channel to use as well with Facebook. which I'll actually show an ad here in a little bit. So making it personal, making it, again, them to be able to relate to your organization and seeing themselves working for you is important. Typically with Facebook, you're also going to see, in most cases, a larger volume. But again, typically they're not going to be as qualified as someone searching for care or searching for the open positions. The third tactic that we recommend, and this is what I typically call the creepy factor a little bit, but it's geofencing. So for those of you that are not familiar with how this works, is you essentially provide a list of target zones. And it could be a competitive hospital if you are looking at recruiting a specific type of nurse, so maybe it's a NICU nurse. You can actually target down to 2.5 inches to a location. So if you say, here's our competitive hospital, here's the floor that the NICU is on, you can target that specific floor looking for those type of nurses. Now, it's everyone that walks into that zone will start seeing the ad, and they're going to be cookied for 30 days. So it's, in addition to nurses, it's going to be the additional staff, it's going to be administration, it's going to be patients and caregivers. But again, it's a good way to get that advertisement out and get that awareness component out to all those individuals. The other one that I do always recommend is think about nursing schools. So if that position is open to brand new college grads, targeting schools that have a nursing program, you probably don't want to target the entire campus, but if there's a specific building that the nursing classes are typically held in, that's what you're going to want to target. Again, it's everyone that walks in and out of that building, but at that point that your nursing candidates are going to see those ads. And then this is one of my personal favorites, video. This is something that you can make, again, really personal and making people see themselves work for you. Some of the best videos we've seen are those that have existing employees speaking of what it's like to work for the organization. You do want to try to keep it into the 30 to 45 second range if at all possible, maybe up to 2 minutes, but best performing video ads are in that 30 to 45 second range. And then it's really low cost. Typically you're paying about 10 to 20 cents per video view. And the way that you pay for that, so let's say you do have a 45-second video spot. If they watched 5 seconds and then click skip ad, you did not pay for anything. Even if they watched 28 seconds of that video and click skip ad, you still did not pay for it. So as long as your branding is upfront, and then they skip ad, you still planted that seed with them. You still made that impression and you didn't have to pay for it. So I'm actually going to click play here, and I'm hoping that the sound comes through of an organization.
It was devastating when Terry's blood
placed the
cancer
video
came
ad.
back.
This is what I'm
But we
talking
learned
about,
that CAR
skip
T.
ad.
The people I work with, honestly, is the biggest draw. I mean, you can't choose who you work with, and I don't know how they did it, but they have just an excellent group of people here, people you want to be with, people you want to spend all those waking hours with. The physicians are excellent, and it makes my job a whole lot easier.
Other hospitals I've worked for, it's more like you come in, you do your job, obviously you do it with excellence, but then you go home. There really aren't a lot of deep relationships. People are there to do their job and leave. And that's not the case at Evergreen. And I think that's what keeps me coming back.
So this one is a little bit long. It's about 2.5 minutes in length. So I'm not going to play the whole thing, but you can kind of get a sense of having existing employees speak to what it's like to work for an organization and call out the benefits to that. And then the last tactic that you could utilize is display or banner advertising. Again, you can target on multiple different levels. But this, again, is really just to really plant the seed for the organization that you are hiring. Typically, this is not going to drive in a lot of applicants, but the goal really with display advertising is to plant that seed. Hopefully they're going to go to their laptop, their mobile device or tablet, whatever it might be, and then do a Google search or SEM. So that's why it's really important to lead with that SEM strategy. So when they do that search, you're there showing up. And then really, and this goes with all your creative, whether it's display, Facebook, etc. Make sure that you do refresh that creative every 3 to 4 months. You just want to avoid creative fatigue in the marketplace. So making sure that that always stays fresh. So that's what we have today. I am going to stop sharing so I can see the chat. So if there are any questions, please go ahead and post it in the chat channel, and we can address them right away. Letitia, while we wait to see if any questions come in, is there anything, departing thoughts that you would want to add?
I don't know. I mean, I think that, we're in a unique situation right now, where recruitment and retention is just hard. And, the more we can understand our culture, the more that we can understand the priorities of the organization, and be able to share that, through transparent, recurring communications with our team members, getting our executive leadership team out there, training our nurse managers to, be impactful communicators and be able to engage in unique times. I mean, there's so many things happening right now where you may be announcing financial cuts, you may be announcing, layoffs, and to be able to put that in the right frame, and be able to share that with our internal audiences before they read about it in the media is really important if we're going to continue to try to engage our nurses and all of our team members in impactful ways where they want to continue to work with us.
Fantastic. Okay, so it doesn't look like any questions are coming in. If any of you think of anything after the fact, please feel free to reach out to either Letitia at Jarrard, or myself at Eruptr. We'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and wish you all success in 2023.
Thank you very much. Have a great one. Bye-bye.